3 years ago, my youngest son passed away. I nearly lost my life the very same night. My organs were starting to shut down one by one. And it was during those moments I realized something very profound.
How important do you think it is for an individual to help others develop grit in order to enhance their own?
In that very moment, I just looked at myself in the mirror and I said, Lara, you got to wake up today. Your son did not. Grit isn't just about trying to push past the uncomfortable every single day, because sometimes you're not able to do that day. So how do you change the attitude towards grit? Stop making this about you. This is not about you. This is about others. What are you going to do with all of that pain, that grief, that trauma? And how are you going to use it as a fuel to help empower others?
Lara, welcome to the UltraGrowth podcast. How are you going?
Thank you, RJ. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for sharing your wonderful audience with me today.
Absolutely. Did you get a workout in today?
Of course I did. Come on now, RJ. This is the grit girl you're talking to. Of course I did. We did a lot of heavy deadlifting today, mixed with some incline bench and some kettlebell swings and cleans. And in fact, the kettlebell won today. I don't know if you can see this.
Oh wow.
You see this right here? Yes. Yeah, this
You swung it right
wonderful
back into
burrito
your
here.
arm.
Totally. It's okay though. These things happen, and that just shows I'm a warrior with the weights, I let them try to fight back, but I still win. It's okay.
I've been on the kettlebells lately. I found a trick to try to, well, it's yet to be determined if it's gonna work, to get rid of my tennis elbow. Like, so as I get older, I get all these wonderful impediments because I go too hard too fast. And I've recently got back in the gym after primarily running and calisthenics for years, and I thought I could just lift where I was. And I got tennis elbow. So there you go, old man.
Not good, RJ. Not good. You need to do cold plunge. That's one of my secrets. So I do cold plunge. And in fact, I do 6 minutes in a cold plunge, 2 minutes in a hot tub, 6 minutes in a cold plunge, 2 minutes hot tub, and then finish 6 minutes back in the doing a cold plunge. 40 degrees.
It really
There you
hits
go.
the niggles, doesn't it? It gets
Oh,
the
it's
niggles.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's horrible when you first get in, but then you just think, this is not pain. This is not pain. And it's more mental than anything else. So yeah, I'm a big believer in cold plunge can help a lot of things with not just physically, but mentally. It just it gives you that adrenaline rush as well. And you feel really good afterwards. Like you could be having a really crappy down day. You go to a cold plunge, boom. It's like an instant mood lifter.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. My wife actually bought me a portable one, and I set it up in the backyard when I go and do runs. Not consistent enough because the labor that goes into having to do it, but definitely, you feel the impact, particularly after a long run. You get in there, you just you recover better, you feel better. It's like a slow release too, right, of endorphins and or dopamines. And yeah. So we're going to, I think that's very much connected to the conversation that we're going to be having today about grit. And I know that lots of people meet grit in different ways. Like, how did you come to grit? Like, what moments in your life culminated in you wanting to get into developing a grit program?
Something I really wanted to become an expert in, but I did because of what I've been through in my life, my experience. I went through a series of traumas over in the UK and decided one day, you know what, I've had enough. I need to choose my own grit before grit chooses me. And the reasoning behind that is more to do with I wanted to develop tools and strategies for when grit came knocking again. So then when it did, I was better prepared and didn't necessarily have to react to it, right? I was going to be more prepared for when it did come knocking. So I up and left the country that I grew up in, came over to the US with nothing, by the way, other than a laptop and my brain. And I couldn't even eat for 3 days because I didn't have money. And at one point I was actually homeless and slept on people's couches. And I really had to build everything from scratch. And a lot of people thought I was crazy back in England. They were like, Lara, you could walk back into a 6-figure salary over in the UK. What are you doing? And I said, it goes beyond that, right? It's more to do now with mindset and understanding that if you really want something, you can go out and get it. Like everybody that used to say to me over in England, oh, that person is just doing that because they're lucky, has nothing to do with luck, right? It has to do with grit, right? They never gave up. They kept persevering and pushing. But here's the thing, grit isn't just about that. Grit isn't just about trying to push past the uncomfortable every single day, because sometimes, depending on the situation or the scenario, it could feel like you're not able to do that day. So how do you change the attitude towards grit? And I'm going to come on to that. So while I was over when I first came over to the US, and I was going through some really challenging times, and quite frankly, it would have been a lot easier if I just got back on a plane and headed back to England. But I got out of my comfort zone. I didn't want to get back into my comfort zone. So I persevered and I believed in myself. And that was the one thing I always held on to. And having that belief just gave me a motivation to act. When you're motivated to act, it influences your cognition. And when you influence how you think, you're now able to alter your brain processes. And when you alter the brain processes, you're now able to adopt a growth mindset, which is what you need to apply the very thing that it is you're trying to learn in the first place. So then the question is, well, how do you instill that belief in people that something's possible? Well, you have to take a step back and say, okay, you've got to create the environment in which they have the autonomy to learn in the way that they want to, because there's 3 different learning styles. So there's visual, listening, and also practical. And the practical one is the one that gets missed the most, which is why most programs, most leadership programs or sales programs or whatever other type of programs are out there, most of them fail because they're not focused on all of those 3 learning elements. And I mean, there's other attributes to that as well. They kind of focus on just interpersonal communication between one person and another, but it's not just about that. It's about getting things done, reframing how you think, impacting others, and taking responsibility. Now, if anyone's listening to what I just said, you'd take a note of each of those first letters. What does it spell? Grit, right? So leadership is grit. You can't be a leader without it. As time went on, I thought, great, I'm making it in America. I've got an American family now. Everything is great. I've got my own company. I've proved to a lot of people that you can come from like having absolutely nothing and build what you have today and have the American dream and all of that stuff. I thought, great. I've finally faced my grit, and now grit, if it comes knocking, I'm going to be ready. That was kind of a mistake on my part, because what happened 3 years ago was in 2021. My youngest son passed away, and I nearly lost my life the very same night. And it was during those moments that I realized something very profound, but it didn't happen until I was lying on that hospital bed after my son had already died, and my organs were starting to shut down one by one. And I remember sitting bolt upright in the bed, and I just was saying at the top of my lungs, "Get me water, I'm going to die." And I was told, "You can't have water, you're going to have surgery." And I said, "Get me water, I'm going to die." And all of a sudden, like I just fell, like collapsed back into the bed. The nurse comes running in. She shines a flashlight in my eyes. My pupils are now not responding. The blood pressure machine is going crazy. It's dropping down to 53/37. There's panic in the room. There's a crash cart that's brought in. All I hear is screaming of emergency blood transfusion, emergency blood transfusion. And I had about 8 seconds before I was about to flatline. And I knew I was about to die. My grandma died that way. I saw her die in front of my eyes. So I knew that the next beep and flash that was going to happen on that machine, that was it. I was going to be gone. And I just remember in that very moment, I'd said my goodbyes because I'm a realist. And then I said, okay, you have 2 choices. 1, you accept it and you die. 2, you accept it, you're probably going to die, but you have to trust that they're going to bring you back. And how was I going to do that? Like, how was I just going to keep fighting? Because I'm a fighter, right? I'm known as a hunter, and I'm a fighter. So I'm like, how are you going to keep fighting? And I applied a technique that I actually use on a lot of other people. I've taught a lot of other people this. It's called the 5-4-3-2-1 technique, where I said, okay, what's the last thing I want to see before I die? And it was my living kids that were back at home, and they were very young. They were only 2.5 and 1 at the time. And I just kept saying, they're going to grow up and not know their mother. So I have to fight because I have to stay here so they do know who I am and they do get to grow up with their mother. And so I started saying, okay, what are the 5 things I can see? What are the 4 things I can hear? What's the 3 things I can feel? 2 things I can taste, and 1 thing that I can smell. And as I was doing that, what happened is my anxiety and my stress kind of reduced. So my heart rate slowed, because I didn't have enough blood in my body for my heart to pump around. And that's why my organs were shutting down one by one. But because I did that and I was able to slow my heart rate down, it actually gave the doctors and nurses a few more seconds to finally figure out, how to get the 16 gauge needle into my collapsed veins with the blood that saved my life. And then I was whisked off into surgery, and my life was saved. But it was, a lot of people don't talk about the aftermath, right? So then I woke up from surgery, and the first thing they said to me was, do you want your son buried or cremated? Here's a death certificate. Which funeral directors do you want to use? Because we have to transport his body. I was just being thrown all of these questions, and I've just gone through major double trauma. And then you're sent home, and I had to explain to my other children why their baby brother was no more, and why he was not coming home. They didn't know at that point that I nearly didn't come home, but I did, and I wasn't going to dwell on the fact that it nearly happened, right? It was the fact that, okay, I'm here. What am I going to do about it? And so again, remember what I said, my husband didn't work. I was had the business, so I was bringing the money in to provide for the family. Well, I also had a team, and they needed to put food on their table for their children. So I had this tremendous pressure as a leader, as a mother, and at the time as a wife, right, to help provide for everybody. And meanwhile, I'm going through this major grief and trauma at the same time. It's like, how do you cope with something like that, right? And I'm going to the extreme of what grit really is. And people listening, some of them may have gone through horrific major trauma, and others may have gone through some trauma that maybe isn't quite on that scale, but trauma is trauma, right? And so I said to myself, okay, how am I gonna get out of this? And it wasn't until about 4 months later, because quite frankly, I'd go to bed sometimes and not want to wake up, and then if I did, I was kind of scared that I wasn't going to. And then if I did, I'd be like, okay, I've got another day. What am I going to do with it? But if I took a shower, that's a win. If I put clothes on, that's a win. And so 4 months went by, and that's when I woke up in Jack's room. That was his name, Jack. And I remember it vividly because it was a Monday, and it was January 2022. And being in Arizona, it is always sunny here, right? So the sun was just beaming in through the window behind me, and it bounced off the mirror and onto my face. And it was like a light bulb just going off. And in that very moment, I just looked at myself in the mirror and I said, Lara, you got to wake up today. Your son did not. You get to feel the sun on your skin today. Your son does not. Stop making this about you. This is not about you. This is about others. What are you going to do with all of that pain, that grief, that trauma? And how are you going to use it as a fuel to help empower others? And in that moment, I said to myself, okay, well, in order to understand how I'm able to help others, I first of all have to understand how have I, what I like to say, grit through the past 4 months. In fact, how have I grit through all of this, right? Over years of all my past traumas. And that's when it dawned on me that everybody knows me as this go-getter type, right? Just get it done person. Like, you throw some crap at Lara, she's going to come out the other side, right? She picks herself up, she brushes herself off. However, I could not do that in this situation because I had emotions attached to it. And that was one area that I hadn't really mastered. And it's an essential point because a lot of people, whether they're leaders or in a team or even as individuals, like at home, we're always told that emotions are messy, right? And emotions can get in the way, and emotions can affect our decision making, and emotions are this, emotions are that. And everything is looked upon emotions as the negative. Here's the flip side to that. Emotions are there for a reason, right? And if you don't allow your emotions to be expressed in a productive way, then you are going to make wrong decisions. Why? Because you're just going to make it all from a logical standpoint, where sometimes we need to use our gut.
Let me just unpack this, right? So let's go back, right? So when this event happened with you, which is super traumatic with your child, and you came through, did you think that you would be able to handle something like that? Like, I think a lot of us, like, we look at trauma and we look at someone else's trauma and we're like, that I could never go through that trauma. Like, did you realize that there were another levels of trauma, and did the grit that you have built up to that point really serve you in being able to cope with what happened with Jack, or did you have to really evolve to be able to meet that too?
Such a great question. Um, there's like two answers I have to this actually. The first answer, when you asked me, did I think I would be able to get through this? Categorically, no, if I'm honest, because I never in a million years had ever thought that I would have to make a decision between burying or cremating my child, ever. It is unnatural. And ironically, it's actually one of my biggest fears from when I was younger. I always felt or thought that something tragic is going to happen. And I don't know why I thought that, but I always thought that like that was one of my biggest fears. I thought, gosh, I never want to have to go through losing a child. And I did. And so, yes, I didn't think that I was going to be able to get through that. There were very dark moments in my life, and it took me 4 months to really surface from that and realize that, and this is answering the second part of the question you had, I had to evolve. I couldn't just rely on what I like to say my dominant grit type is, right? Which is just get it done. Just get back up and, don't dwell on it, just move on. You can't do that when you've lost a child. I mean, you just can't. And even with the trauma of nearly losing my life, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder as well. And so I was dealing with, hypervigilance, and I was dealing with a lot of flashbacks and nightmares and, just terrible thoughts that something, catastrophic was going to happen again. And so you have to realize that you can use it as a superpower or you can use it to eat you. You do have a choice with it. It's something that is either going to really hurt you or come on, you've got to use it somehow as a fuel. And, I will tell you this, that, 80% of our thoughts are negative and 90% are repetitive. And so we're battling those negative thoughts every day. There's always negative thoughts that come into our head. But if you keep trying to fight it, which is what I was doing in the beginning, if you keep trying to fight it and fight it and fight it, they just come back stronger. And so the trick and the key really is to acknowledge it, right? Once you start acknowledging it, which can be painful, right, in the beginning, but you acknowledge it, you don't even have to accept it. You just acknowledge it. And then you say to yourself, is this serving me? And you say, not today, thank you. And so then you lock it up in a box and you put it up on a shelf. And you don't think about it again, but you've acknowledged it. So now it's not going to come back to try and fight you because you have given it some time to be able to say, okay, this isn't serving me in this moment. So goodbye. And that's what I had to do, right? And I realized that's how I started to evolve. And that's how I started to learn about reframing how I thought about the situation. And that's how I started applying a different level of grit that I had to learn. Right, this wasn't something that was innate in me. The G in grit was innate, but not the R. And so therefore, that took a lot of practice, a lot of skill, a lot of time to learn how to do that in such a stressful situation.
Yeah, I think that, like, there's a lot of nuance, right? And you can dominate and grit your way through many things, but ultimately trauma catches up to us, right? And the question is like, do we have the ability to sit in a room by ourselves without going crazy? And I think at some point we need to be able to answer that question, because I could kind of push and prod and hustle my way through everything, but I could be batshit crazy. And I think like it's about quality of narrative and quality of life. Like I think that statistic you threw out is really interesting. The 80% of our thoughts being negative and 90% being repetitive. And I think that's one of the key reasons why, you know, with my son, I'm kind of training him right now in terms of his grit and mindset. And yes, like, I tell him he's enough, but he won't believe it. He won't believe it because that's the human condition. He's going to have to earn his trident every day too. Like he's going to have to prove to himself every day. And I think to try to fluff him and tell him and raise him that, no, you're enough, you're enough, you're enough. I'm doing him a disservice because the reality is that he won't understand that until maybe he's a man. Maybe he never will. But in doing that, I think I rob him. And I think we rob people when we don't teach them how to develop the capability and capacity to cope. So going back to your story, you did you have a point, and I think you were touching on it, when you realized that Lara, the get shit done chick, is this isn't necessarily working? Like, and what did that moment look like for you?
Well, everybody that knows me knows I like to move at a million miles an hour and I live my life very, very fast. So I was getting frustrated because I'm just like, I just want to move out of this space. Like, I didn't want to be in this like pain anymore. And so I'm a solution girl. I'm just like, I gotta find a solution. I gotta find a solution. But the truth of the matter is, I didn't have one because I wanted to bring my son back, and that wasn't an option. So I had to learn how to slow down, which is something a lot of people in the audience that maybe go-getters like me who are very fast-paced. Oh, I feel your pain, right? I know what it's like to try and slow down. But I had to do that. I had to be one with my thoughts, right? And say, are these thoughts useful? Because you can think what you want to feel, but how you react to it is your choice. And so once you're cognizant of that, every thought that comes in, you get to choose the action, right? You get to choose the reaction. Um, and sometimes that's not always easy for go-getters because they just react to things. They just want to get things done, right? It's a skill that takes a lot of practice and a lot of time to slow down and learn. And again, that's very difficult when you face nearly the loss of your life and you've witnessed your son pass away, because you realize how precious life is and how quickly it can get taken from you. And so therefore you start to act with urgency because all of a sudden there may not be a tomorrow, right? There may not even be an evening. Things can just get taken immediately.
How did you slow down?
I realized that if I didn't, I was going to drown. And what I mean by that is there were days when I just didn't want to be here anymore. And I had, those thoughts of, well, I just want to be with Jack. And that was terrible. I thought to myself, no, I can't think like that. I got to be with my living kids, right? They need me. And I think it was that realization, like I said, that 4 months later when I looked at myself in that mirror, and it just like hit me. And I thought, well, instead of making this about you, you make it about others. And I started creating like this purpose and this mission. And in fact, this is a really important point for a lot of people that may struggle to find that grit, because you're going to wake up on days and not feel like doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing, right? Or the thing that you committed to be doing. There are going to be days you don't want to get up and you don't want to go, like maybe you don't want to get up and go to the gym because it's cold outside or it's raining outside. You get up and you go anyway, right? If you only have 3-4 hours of sleep, you get up and you go anyway. And so my biggest thing was when I started identifying what my mission really was in life and what my purpose was, it was a game changer for me. And then I actually got like a little symbol, which is actually right here, these little feet right here. It's a reminder that every day I wake up, if I don't feel like doing something, I see these baby feet and I'm like, that's your why. That's why you do what you do. You don't get a choice to not do it because you were given a second chance. Your son was not. So you get to breathe again today. Don't you dare waste it. And it was that just, it really hit me in that moment. And I said, what is my mission? And it's to impact at least one person for at least one day for every day that I'm breathing. And what's your purpose? And it's to empower belief and transform futures. It's very simple, but very effective.
Let's talk about the framework. So get it done, reframe thinking, impact others, and take responsibility. And how are you now using this system to impact others in kind of the professional scene and in the corporate scene, leadership space?
It's a great question, and I'm actually going to show you. If you're listening to this, I'll talk you through it. But if you are actually watching, you'll be able to see. I'm going to demonstrate something on my whiteboard here. So everybody that knows me knows I love a whiteboard. By the way, I'm like obsessed with the whiteboard. Okay. So I'm glad you asked the question because I like to show people how simple this is, how easy it is to follow, and how complex it can get. So everybody wants to have this growth, right? They talk about it. They're like, okay, how do I, because this is what I'm hired to do, right? To help teams and leaders and even individuals. I do these really cool VIP days. It's amazing to see these transformations in people. But anyway, Most people start down here, right, in comfort. And why? Because it's safe, right? It's their safe space. It's what they know. And in fact, our brains are actually doing what they're supposed to do. They're keeping us safe. What's on the other side of comfort? In fact, let me ask you this. How do you get to growth? Most people will say, oh, well, you can just go through some fear and then you get to growth. Wrong, right? Yes, fear is on the other side of comfort, but there's a gap that's missing. Why does this always get missed? Well, I'll tell you. Because as a society, we have a growing need for instant gratification. And so we just want it now, because of all the technology that we have. We're used to that now as a society. But we're human beings and we have a brain and our brain loves a system, it loves a process, and it takes time to teach it, right? So I call this the learning zone, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute. So what I like to ask people is, well, how do you get out of comfort and get into fear? Like, this is our end goal up here, right? The growth. So let's go through the process. How do we get out of comfort and get into fear? Well, we have to utilize the G in grit. I just want to make sure you can see this. Okay. You have to utilize the G in grit, right? You've got to be able to get it done. You got to take action. And actually, arguably, that is one of the most easiest for me to be able to teach people, believe it or not, but it is. What happens though, is that once I get them into this fear, like the fear zone, all of a sudden, one or two things can happen. If you don't have the right tools and strategies to get out of fear and get into learning, then you're just going to run back to comfort. The other half will either freeze or they just be like, no, I don't want to give up. I just want to keep grinding. But again, they don't have the right tools. They don't have the right strategies. So what happens is you keep doing the same thing as relentless and you're just grinding. Well, your stress levels increase, your anxiety increases. And so therefore that leads to burnout, and burnout leads to poor performance, and poor performance is going to lead to either getting you fired or you're going to leave. Now you have a bigger problem on your hands, right? The company has a bigger problem on their hands. Now they have a retention issue. Now they have a recruitment issue, right? So this is what happens. And it's this loop that goes on and on. I see it daily. So then how do you get out of fear and into learning? Well, that's where one of the hardest part of grit, which is what we've focused quite a bit on this conversation, that's what you've got to harness is the R in grit. You've got to be able to reframe how you think about the situation, how you think about something. I've got many stories with how I've able to reframe my thinking, and not through the tragedy that I discussed, but just through some of my fitness stuff. How do you reframe how you think about fear is going to lead you to be able to start using a practical element of it so you can learn. And this is where we miss out, because people want to skip it because they just want to immediately, once they've got it, they're like, oh, I go straight to growth. If you don't practice this, if you don't keep yourself accountable, if you don't have the discipline to be able to apply the reframing when it's needed on a daily basis, you will never get out of that fear and get into learning. But once you do, it's a game changer. This is where the magic happens, right? But you don't want to stay in the learning zone for too long, because otherwise it's like having a really good book, pinning it on the shelf, and then it collects dust and you're not doing anything with it. So how do we get out of learning and get into growth? Well, that's where you have to pull from the I in grit, and you innovate, you impact others through innovation. So in other words, if you're able to innovate your way out of a challenge, it's not a challenge anymore, it's an opportunity. And then where does the C come in? Once you've achieved that growth, well, it's now your responsibility. You've got to take responsibility to start this whole process all over again. And where your new growth is now has just become your new comfort level. And the process goes on and on and on. And that's how I relate the grit system related to growth, right? Because that's what people want to have. They want to understand how to get the comfort to growth. And I say to people, look, you don't necessarily have to know or like have to be in a specific category right now. You just have to be aware of which one you're in, right?
How important do you think it is for an individual to help others develop grit in order to enhance their own? Like, do you think it's something that is one of those pay it forward things?
100%, like without a doubt. If you are someone that has developed grit, right, and you've got a team around you, or however you want to use this, you got people around you. It's your responsibility to teach those other people how to develop that grit and why. Because again, there's studies out there that show that grit, you're more likely to finish a task because of grit versus talent. Like if somebody came to me and they were talented but they had no grit, but somebody was really gritty but didn't have the talent, I'd take the person that had grit all day long, right? I just would. The talented person I could help develop the grit in, but if I've got someone that's already got that grit, I'm going to take them because I can teach them. I can teach them the talent part, right? But the grit is something that is such a powerful tool to have and to be able to use as a skill set in any situation, and not go into a panic mode or some frightened mode, because that's just going to push you straight back down to the comfort level again, right? So I think when you surround yourself with people that are very gritty, you're going to learn a heck of a lot from them. And really, that's what I did as well. I even with I'm a competitive athlete, and I threw myself into a situation where they were basically all lions, right? And here I am, the baby cub, coming along like, I want to play, thinking, well, just because they're all jacked and all this, that doesn't mean I can't be, right? I didn't turn up looking the way I look now. I wasn't as muscular and as fit as what I am today, but it's a process and it took time. And if you apply the discipline, you apply the grit, you apply the accountability, you will get there. But the reason why people give up is because they get lazy and they don't have the patience, right? They just want it now. And that's where you have to teach yourself to be able to slow down and realize, okay, am I following the right process in which I need to get to that end goal? Now, there's times when slowing down is not an option. You need to go fast. Why? Because if you don't, your competitors are about to get ahead of you. So obviously, I'm more inclined to go the fast way because that's just by nature who I am. But on the flip side, you're going to have people that by nature are much more slower paced, where they have to really learn. So like reframers are very slow paced. They have to learn from the go-getters how to get things done a lot quicker. And maybe the go-getters can learn from the reframers how to slow down in certain situations. So it's fascinating to me when I look at the different grit types and how they can interweave and help each other. And just the explosion that can happen from that in terms of the amount of grit that can be developed, not just in individuals, but as a team.
I agree with that. I find with my decision making, I'm generally fast. And so like the team know that I like to be 70, 80% there. Let's go. However, with strategic key decisions, high investment, I'll slow down. And so I have this kind of mode throughout the day of operating twofold. It's not easy to operate on different gears, but you got to also know what are the odds of getting it wrong and how big that would be, and then slow down. And most decisions people are generally procrastinating because of fear and indecision, and speed's a competitive advantage, right? Like you want to be 50, 60% right, but first versus like 100% right and last, right? So like I think I tend to agree with you. One final question I really wanted to touch on, Lara, and really appreciate again your strength and your honesty and your story. I think that was just remarkable in terms of sharing that. So again, I really appreciate you and thank you for that. The grit indicator, like how important is it to know your grit type?
Extremely important. And here's why. If you can understand yourself and understand how you react in situations, you then can start developing the tools in the other areas of grit that you need to be able to pull through some different challenges that may require a different type of grit. Just like I showed you in my example, if I had that skill of reframing from the get-go, I wouldn't have probably taken as long to get to, to get that air, if you will, from the drowning. Like metaphorically is what it felt like. If you're also able to understand your grit type and other people's grit type, then you're able to communicate with them in a way that resonates, right? And so how you encode information is going to be very different from how somebody else decodes it from you. It's not going to be the same. So you have to be able, like, if you can master that skill and understand their grit type, which is, something I obviously teach heavily on with grit. I do workshops in this actually, but it's fascinating to see, I see the transformation in people and they're like, oh, so that's why such and such is this way. That's why I have this conflict. Yes, because I teach them how they react under stress and then what they need to do in that situation. How do you get out of that? How do you prevent it, right? So it's extremely important that you understand what your grit type is, not your personality, but your grit type. Because what I've created, the grit type indicator, is kind of like the DISC assessment, but in grit. It doesn't measure your personality style or anything like that. It is focused on how do you react to challenges? What's your dominant trait, if you will, to how you approach any type of adversity or challenges or change. And it can tell a lot about someone because you can put on a front, you can be somebody that can pretend to be one person, but actually when shit hits the fan, the real you comes out. It just does. So this really exposes who you really are underneath, and how you handle gritty situations.
I appreciate that, Laura. And where can our audience find you and learn more about you? I will have it in the show notes.
Well, thank you for asking that. Well, if anyone's interested in the book, Hunt or Be Hunted, that I wrote, it's called Hunt or Be Hunted, How Anyone Can Develop Grit and Lead Like a Legend. It's available on Amazon. So you just type Hunt or Be Hunted and put Lara Jones, and it's Lara, there's no U. And they can also visit my website, which is larajones.com, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active, as you know, on LinkedIn. I post daily content for not just inspiration, but actually to help a lot of people. Maybe they're going through a tough situation or whatever, but I post a lot of content on there. So they can find me as Lara Jones. You can type Lara Jones keynote speaker or Lara Jones grit, and I should come up. And in fact, I actually wanted to share something with the audience, if that's okay, RJ. But I actually wanted to give something away to the audience for those that have been listening. And it's my grit accountability guide. So a lot of people come to me and they struggle with having accountability to apply grit in their lives. So I created like a little cheat sheet, if you will, to help people in each of those, the G, the R, the I, and the T. And so if they want to have access to this grit accountability guide, I actually just want to give it away for free to your audience. And all they have to do is just text the word grit. So just G-R-I-T, just text the word grit to 55444. That's 55444. And then you just follow the prompts and it'll be sent to you. So just text the word grit to 55444 and you'll be able to have access to that grit accountability guide.
Thank you so much, Laura. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.